The village of Lungra had long lived in fear of the woman in the forest. Her name had been forgotten, swallowed by the whispers of time, replaced only by the title they gave her. Asterisk, asterisk, the Fire Mother, asterisk, asterisk. She was a specter of legend, the source of nightmares told to keep children from wandering too far into the trees. The elders spoke of a time, decades past, when she had burned all the children of the village in one terrible night. No one knew why. Some claimed she had been possessed by a spirit of vengeance. Others believed she had sought to punish the people for some unknown crime. Whatever the reason, she had been cast out, left to wander the wilderness, never to return. Yet she still lived. Alone, hidden among the tangled roots of ancient trees, she moved like a shadow, unseen but never forgotten. The villagers left offerings at the forest's edge, not as tribute but as a warning, to remind the spirits that she belonged to them now, and they to her. No one dared to disturb her. No one until now. Liam had always been drawn to the forbidden. A young warrior of the Ao tribe, he had never believed the stories that bound his people in fear. He had spent his childhood standing at the edge of the trees, staring into the darkness, waiting for the Fire Mother to emerge. He had never seen her, never heard a whisper of her presence, but he knew she was there. The weight of unspoken truths lay heavy on the village, and he wanted to know why. The chance came when an old woman, a grandmother who had lived through the fire, spoke on her deathbed. Her voice, brittle as dry leaves, rasped out a confession. She did not kill them for hate. She murmured, her eyes unfocused, lost in the past. She tried to save them. The room had gone still, but she said no more. That night, she passed into the next world, leaving behind only questions. Liam knew he could not let it rest. Armed with his spear and a lantern, he stepped beyond the boundary of the village and into the forbidden forest. The air grew thick with the scent of damp earth and moss, and the trees whispered secrets in a language older than time. The further he walked, the more he felt the weight of unseen eyes upon him. He knew the stories. Spirits haunted these woods, angry and restless. They did not take kindly to trespassers. He had traveled for hours when he saw the fire. It was small, flickering between the trees, but it was enough. He moved toward it, careful to keep his steps light, his presence unnoticed. But before he could get too close, a voice cut through the stillness. "You should not have come." She stood on the other side of the fire, her figure cast in shadows. She was not the hag of legend, nor the monstrous figure that mothers warned their children about. She was tall, draped in worn cloth, her dark hair streaked with silver, her eyes reflecting the flames. They were tired eyes, hollow with something far deeper than age. Liam tightened his grip on his spear. "I need to know the truth." She did not move. For a long moment, the silence stretched between them, thick with the weight of unspoken things. Then finally she sighed. "You will not like what you find." "I don't care." A flicker of something, perhaps amusement, perhaps sorrow, passed across her face. She sat beside the fire, motioning for him to do the same. When he hesitated, she arched a brow. "If I meant you harm, you would already be burning." He lowered himself to the ground. The heat of the fire licked at his skin, but he did not look away from her. "Tell me," he said. She looked into the flames, as if searching for something lost. When she spoke, her voice was quiet, but there was no mistaking the weight it carried. "The night they burned, the stars were wrong," she began. The elders saw it first. The sky had turned the color of old blood, and the air smelled of something rotten, something not of this world. Liam shivered. He had heard of such omens, though never in connection to her story. "The spirits were angry," she continued. "They whispered to the elders, warning them of what was to come. But they were afraid. They thought they could appease the spirits with offerings. They were wrong." She fell silent, her hands tightening into fists. "What happened?" Liam pressed. She exhaled, a breath heavy with ghosts. "The curse came in the form of sickness. It took the children first. Not all at once, not in a way that could be fought. One by one, they grew fevered, their eyes turning black, their voices lost to something that was no longer human." Liam's stomach twisted. This was not the story he had been told. The elders refused to see what was happening, she said bitterly. They tried to hide it, to bury the truth. But I knew. I saw what they had become. They were no longer children. She turned to him then, and for the first time, he saw it. The weight of 1,000 regrets, the burden of choices made in desperation. I did what had to be done. Liam felt the breath leave his lungs. They would have killed us all, she said. I had no choice. The fire crackled between them, casting shadows that danced like spirits in the dark. Liam wanted to deny it, to call her a liar, but deep in his bones, he knew. This was the truth. Not the legend told to frighten children. Not the tale of a heartless woman consumed by rage, but a tragedy buried beneath time and silence. What did the elders do? He asked. She laughed, a hollow, bitter sound. They called me a murderer. They cast me out and told the world I was a monster. It was easier that way. Liam's grip tightened around his spear, but he did not raise it. He had found the truth he sought, but it was not one he was prepared for. The woman before him was not a villain, nor was she a hero. She was something far more terrible. She was human. A wind stirred through the trees, sending embers spiraling into the sky. The night pressed in around them, heavy with the weight of history. What will you do now? She asked. He did not know, but he knew one thing. He could not return to his village with this truth and pretend it did not change everything. And so, as the fire burned low and the forest whispered its secrets, he made a decision. He would stay. The days in the forest stretched into weeks. Liam had come seeking truth, and in its place he found something far more unsettling: understanding. The Fire Mother, whose name he learned was Raimai, was nothing like the monster the village had painted her to be. She did not seek revenge, nor did she wallow in bitterness. She lived as the forest did, unburdened by the past except in the quiet hours when silence pressed too heavily upon her. At first, she treated him as a guest, an unwelcome one. She made no effort to keep him there, but neither did she drive him away. He built his own shelter near the river, caught his own food, and, in time, learned to read the forest as she did. It was not a place of exile, as the village believed, but a world teeming with life, with rhythms older than human memory. The spirits here did not whisper warnings. They did not curse or seek vengeance. They watched. Raimai spoke little, and when she did, it was never of the past. She spoke of the trees, the way the roots stretched like unseen hands beneath the soil, how they whispered to one another when the wind shifted. She spoke of the river, how it carried stories carved in the bones of the land. She spoke of fire, not as a thing of destruction, but of renewal. And Liam listened. He found himself drawn to her, not in fear, but in fascination. She moved with the quiet grace of someone who had learned to exist between the cracks of the world, unseen but always present. The lines of her face were etched with time, but she carried them like a warrior carried scars. And when she looked at him, truly looked at him, it was as if she saw past flesh and bone, past words and doubts, into something deeper. One evening, as the sun bled into the horizon, he found her at the river's edge. She stood with her feet in the water, her reflection a ripple of gold and shadow. He hesitated before stepping closer. I don't understand why you let me stay, he said. She did not look at him. Would you have left if I had told you to? He had no answer. She sighed, tilting her head toward the sky. I spent so many years alone, I forgot what it was like to hear another voice, even one full of questions. Liam frowned. Is that all I am to you? A voice. Now she did turn, her gaze steady, unreadable. You are the first to seek truth instead of comfort. That is not nothing. The words lingered between them, weightless and heavy all at once. That night, he dreamed of fire. Not the raging inferno of the stories, but something smaller, something gentler. A single flame cupped in careful hands. He did not wake with fear. The days turned colder, and Liam found himself wondering what the village would do when he did not return. He thought of his mother, his siblings, the elders who had warned him against chasing ghosts. But when he thought of leaving, the idea felt hollow. The village was home, but here was something else. a truth not built on fear. One morning, he found Ryamai sitting outside her hut, staring at a small bundle in her lap. It was wrapped in cloth, delicate despite the years that had worn it thin. She traced her fingers over it before speaking. "There is something I must show you." He sat beside her, waiting. Slowly, she unwrapped the bundle. Inside lay a small, charred bracelet of woven grass and beads. It was fragile, barely held together, and yet it carried the weight of a world. "I made this for my daughter," she said, voice barely more than a breath. Liam felt his chest tighten. "You had a child?" Her nod was almost imperceptible. She was among the first to fall ill. He closed his eyes, understanding settling over him like ash. She had not only watched the village's children burn, she had watched her own. Ryamai let the silence stretch before she spoke again. "Do you know why I never left this place?" Liam shook his head. "Because I did not burn alone." The wind shifted, carrying the scent of earth and rain. She lifted the bracelet to her lips, pressing it there for a moment before closing her hands around it once more. Liam swallowed hard. "Do you believe the village will ever forgive you?" She let out a small, tired laugh. "Forgiveness is for the living. The dead ask for nothing." But Liam was not convinced. He had seen how the village clung to its fear, how the stories twisted the truth into something easier to accept. But he had also seen how the old woman's final words had cracked that foundation. The elders had buried the truth, but truth had a way of surfacing. "What if you could go back?" he asked. She looked at him, truly looked at him, and, for the first time, he saw something like hope flicker in her eyes. "You would walk beside a monster?" Liam's lips curved into the smallest of smiles. "I think the village got that part wrong." For a long moment, she said nothing. Then, slowly, she reached out, resting her fingers lightly against his. It was not a promise, not yet, but it was something. And sometimes, something was enough. The village was waiting. Liam felt the weight of their gazes before he even stepped beyond the trees. Figures stood in clusters, half hidden behind woven huts and smoldering hearths, their faces etched with the lines of old fear. No one spoke, but the silence carried its own kind of accusation. They had known he would return eventually. They had not expected him to bring the Fire Mother with him. Ryamai walked beside him, her steps steady despite the way the villagers shrank from her presence. She did not cower, nor did she challenge their fear. She carried herself, as she always had, like someone who had long since made peace with her ghosts. Only her hands, clenched into fists at her sides, betrayed her unease. The elders stood in a semicircle at the village center. Liam recognized them all, men and women who had watched over his childhood, who had spoken of duty and tradition, who had taught him what it meant to belong. Now, their expressions were unreadable, carved from something harder than stone. "You bring a curse into our home," one of them said, an old man with a voice like rusted iron. Liam did not flinch. "I bring the truth." A murmur rippled through the crowd, uneasy and uncertain. The old man's jaw tightened. "Truth," he spat. "We know the truth. We have lived with it for years. She is a murderer, a monster. Her sins are written in our blood." Ryamai did not react, but Liam stepped forward. "And if I told you that the sins you speak of were never hers?" The murmurs grew louder. Someone whispered a prayer. Another cursed under their breath. The elders' gaze darkened. "You speak in riddles, boy." "No," Liam said, voice steady. "For the first time, I speak plainly. You tell stories of the night the children burned, but you never tell the whole story. You never speak of the sickness that came before, the rot that took them one by one. You never speak of how the elders begged the spirits for mercy, or how they failed to listen when the spirits warned them it was too late." The air shifted, tense and heavy. The elder's mouth pressed into a thin line. "Lies." But there was something in his eyes, something uncertain. Liam pressed on. "She did not burn them to punish us. She burned them to save us." His voice did not waver. "She saw what the rest of you refused to see. They were already gone. If she had not acted, the sickness would have taken us all." For the first time, Ryamai spoke. "I did what the elders could not." Her voice was quiet, but it carried across the village like the wind before a storm. "And for that, they call me a monster." Silence. The elder exhaled sharply. Even if what you say is true, it does not erase what was done. No, Raimai agreed. It does not. The old man searched her face, perhaps looking for guilt, for sorrow, for something he could understand. But Raimai had long since abandoned the need for absolution. She had come not for forgiveness, but for truth. Another elder, a woman bent with age but sharp with memory, stepped forward. And what do you seek here now? Raimai turned her gaze to the sky, where the smoke of cooking fires twisted into the clouds. When she looked back, her eyes were softer, though no less certain. I seek only to be remembered for what I was. Not a monster, not a curse, just a mother who made an impossible choice. The village held its breath. Liam saw the struggle in their faces. The old stories were chains, and chains did not break easily. But cracks had formed, and cracks had the power to bring down even the strongest walls. The old woman studied Raimai, then looked toward the sky herself, as if searching for something in the wind. Finally, she nodded, slow and deliberate. Then, that is how we will remember you. The elder beside her inhaled sharply, but he did not speak. He only lowered his head. A shift, small but undeniable, rippled through the gathered villagers. The fear did not vanish, nor did the pain of the past, but something had changed. The name of the Fire Mother would no longer be spoken only in fear. Raimai closed her eyes for a long moment. When she opened them, something in her shoulders had eased, as if a weight she had carried for too many years had finally begun to lift. She turned to Liam. You have given me more than I ever thought possible. He smiled, a quiet, knowing thing. You are not alone anymore. She nodded, then, and together they turned away from the village. The past could not be undone, but it could be told truly. And in the end, perhaps that was enough.